Greetings and God bless. Welcome to another episode of Pastor Mike, Dynamic Voices for a Diverse Church, powered by The Witness, a Black Christian collective. I'm your host, Tyler Burns. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Burns Clan. Please follow at your own risk. And joining me, as always, is the founder of The Witness, very extensive bio. He is the man, the myth, the legend, the two-time best-selling author, Mr. Blue Check Verified himself, Dr. Jamar Tisby. What's going on, brother?
The people, listen, we love our Pastor Mike listeners. We have been through so much to try to record. And we on the mic. You don't have to hear all of that. Just know that we are dedicated and committed to you. So thanks for tuning in.
Dr. Jamar Tisby, we said you're a two-time best-selling author. Listen, I don't claim to be a prophet, but I have been known to be prophetic. And so I might as well just go ahead and put in there, three-time best-selling author. Yo, you got a book coming out, bro.
Bro, The Spirit of Justice, True Stories of Faith, Race, and Resistance. Bro, I've got so many stories to tell. The book drops September 3rd. You can pre-order it now wherever you get your books. If you go to any of my links in bios, you can find it there for fast and quick access.
Now, we've been doing this little teaser for the people for a while now. We need to talk about the book. Let's just do that today. Let's talk about the book. And I want to talk about the book because you've been talking about this particular book since January 2019 when you released Color Compromise. You've been talking about this follow-up to the book for a long, long time.
Wow, I love your memory.
Oh, come on, man. We're not going to forget. We're not going to forget what the brother said. You know, you spoke it into existence, man. We're not going to forget. You've been talking about the counter to the Color of Compromise and the counter to a compromising Christianity, which you've always told us is a courageous Christianity, which will confront. Hey, look, man, we ain't playing, man. We ain't playing with the people, man. But talk a little bit about how long this has been in you, especially to address and to bring to light.
So speaking from the heart, to write and speak about white racism, particularly white Christian racism, is extremely draining. I even changed my dissertation topic because of it, because I had just written The Color of Compromise, and my original dissertation topic was going to be along similar lines. So I'm like, I can't go through this. I actually need some refreshing, some encouragement, some strength, some counter narratives, which, as we talk about white Christian racism, the counter narrative is the Black Christian tradition. And so one way to think about the Spirit of Justice is the counterpoint, the alternative narrative to The Color of Compromise. So if The Color of Compromise is about white Christians behaving badly, demonstrating compromise and complicity with racism, the Spirit of Justice is about mainly Black Christians and the ways they courageously confronted racism and white supremacy.
And as you think about this idea and this concept, specifically the way in which Black Christians have not allowed for what they see and what has happened to us to dictate our activity. In other words, we haven't just succumbed to the times that we live in. We haven't just said things are the way that they are and they'll always be the way that they are. Can you talk about a little bit of the agency in action to step out and do something about what you see? Because I feel like that's a major piece. And as a pastor, as a leader, it's always been a major piece that's been a little frustrating for me, is we see things and we do not acknowledge what we see. We do not challenge what we see. We just assume that things are the way that they will always be. But the history of the Black Christian tradition, or as we like to call it, the expansive Black Christian tradition, is confronting what we see and saying things don't have to be this way.
I love that you named that, talking about the agency of Black Christians, because we took the Christianity that Europeans tried to impose upon us, which was a slaveholder Christianity. We remixed it into what it is originally from the mouth of Jesus, which is a gospel of liberation and freedom. So in the introduction, I talk about different forms of resistance. I talk about the difference between resistance, advocacy, and activism. Resistance, advocacy, and activism. And I wanted to do that because throughout the book, you're going to see all kinds of examples of Black Christians confronting racism, but it's in ways big and small. So resistance is anything that we do as Black people to live and flourish in a context of racism and white supremacy. So in the chapter on the colonial era, I talk about Anthony and Isabel Johnson and their child, William. And this is from a census in the year 1625. And it's the first recorded uh, birth that we have in colonial, British colonial era. So, in a sense, William, their child, is the first truly African American child born in North America, but his parents from
Mm,
Africa during
wow.
this uh, colonial era. So having a family, I argue, is a form of resistance because children represent hope for the future. You want to give them the tools and the character and hope and pray and believe for a better day for your child. And even, having a family, having children, continuing to exist and persist is a form of resistance. That's one. Advocacy is another. So, advocacy is about amplification. A lot of folks listening to this podcast, you're advocates. You amplify the cause of justice. You're not necessarily on the front lines, but you see what folks are doing and you try to bring attention to those causes. That's really, really important because folks need money, folks need publicity, folks need other folks to show up. They need the crowds to come if there's some sort of activity and whatnot. That's what advocates do. But there's an intentionality there. Resistance doesn't necessarily have to be I'm consciously resisting racism, white supremacy, but I'm just trying to live. Advocacy is intentional. Advocacy is a decision and a choice. But then there's activism. And that's what we generally think about as resistance. So this is truly the marches, the community organizers, the boycotts, the protests, and the people who sort of do this either for a living or very publicly at bodily risk. Oftentimes, they could be jailed, they could be beaten, they could be killed. But I want us to understand that all of it constitutes a confrontation with injustice. So it could be just getting up and having a morning routine that sets you up in a healthy way for the day, or it could be, staging a sit-in as a protest and everything in between.
Now, why did you feel the need to go into that? Why did you feel the need to distill that? Because what I find in your writing is you're not just throwing out concepts just to throw them out, but you're really trying to draw from history what should inform us today, what we
Mm.
need to keep in mind, what we need to keep at the forefront as we resist against injustice and oppression in our world. Why do you think it's particularly important for us to know the differences in now in 2024?
I think we're in different seasons of life. So if you're a college student, you're not partnered up, you don't have children, you can probably do some activism in an easier way than somebody who's got young children at home, a job they got to get up and go to because they need the health care from it or whatever it might be. So I think it's important that we understand that life moves in seasons, that even some of the people that we view as the most active activists, it might have been for a season, it might have been for a few years, or even a few months or a summer, right? And then they moved on to different forms of activism. I think of Dr. Angela Y. Davis, who I often quote the title of one of her more recent books, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, because it truly is. But she moved from being a very front lines activist, and she still was involved in protests and all that stuff, but she got her doctorate and became a professor later in life, right? And that was her way of continuing resistance to injustice. So I wanted to widen the aperture of what we consider resistance, to know that it can take all forms, and to help the reader understand why I included certain folks. Why did I include Elizabeth Keckley, who was a dressmaker for Mary Todd Lincoln, the wife of Abraham Lincoln? Why would I include a dressmaker? Because she was born enslaved, but she had such skill as a dressmaker and a fashion designer that she saved up enough money. She bought her freedom. She got connected in the wealthy elite class of Washington, D.C., and got into those circles. And because she had exposure to what the white folks were doing, she's like, Black folks can do this. And she starts essentially a foundation to raise money for recently freed Black people. And she used her connections in the Washington elite that she had gained by becoming a dressmaker to provide financial relief and other services for recently freed Black people who didn't have a dime to their name, right?
Mm.
But why would a dressmaker be involved? Because her dressmaking is resistance, her entrepreneurship is resistance, her social network is resistance. And we can think creatively about the ways that we can use the place where we are and the people we're around to resist injustice.
Now, here's what I've observed about this particular book ramp up comparatively to the previous two. Can we get, is this too real for TV? Is this too real for TV?
We got to get into, I got so much to say about publishing and marketing
No,
books.
here's what I've observed about you, right? What I've observed about you is this seems to be the most excited you've been to promote a book. But this also seems to be the heaviest lift you've had to do to promote a book. Can you talk about that
Bro,
duality of how excited you are, but how excited or how little the market might be excited for something that doesn't have to deal with the catastrophe that is white supremacy?
bro, you are observant. I don't know how you saw this, or you just know, you just be knowing. Um, we watched the movie American Fiction the other day. And without any spoilers, I mean, essentially the premise
Did you enjoy
is,
this movie? I enjoyed the movie.
yes, we had quite the conversation
It was
about it.
very interesting, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the film.
I absolutely did, because, and especially for us as writers, like it really hits close to home. There's an audience for a certain kind of Black experience. They call it trauma porn, right? You tell the deepest, darkest, grittiest experience of Black people, which, as the main character says, is true, but it's only part of the Black experience. But the stuff that gets you on the bestseller list, the stuff that gets all the eyeballs and the money, is often Black people talking about their most traumatic experiences, right? And this, there's definitely trauma involved in the spirit of justice, because folks are experiencing racism and white supremacy, but it's about the resistance to that. It's about the ways people triumph, the ways people are just determined not to let the injustices and the oppression they experience get them down. And that's a much harder sell for people. It's a much harder sell for Black people who might look at this and have like justice fatigue and resistance fatigue, and just, I do this all day every day, I don't want another book. That's not this book. This is a book about who we can look up to and who can inspire us, and not about them being lynched or beaten or whatever. It's a part of a lot of their stories, but the focus in this book is on the ways they push back against that. So I think it's empowering for Black folks. And for other folks, for like white folks, there was a line in that movie American Fiction that said, white people don't want truth, they want absolution. They want
Mm.
they want to claim, well, I'm not racist, right?
Mm.
This is a book that maybe doesn't scratch the itch of wanting to see how bad things were and to say, thank God it's not like that anymore. At the same time, and I'll wrap up my answer with this. At the same time, the biggest critique of my first book, The Color of Compromise, was, well, what about the good white Christians? You didn't talk about the abolitionists. You didn't talk about, the things that white people did to resist racism. It was just all bad with you. I'm like, first of all, those were the exception, not the rule. So I talk in the intro to The Spirit of Justice, beware of historical appropriation. Just like cultural appropriation, you take on different forms and artifacts of a culture without actually appreciating or honoring or respecting where it came from, and you sort of colonize it as if it's your own. People can do the same thing with history. They can take a more triumphant history, a more virtuous history, and claim it as their own, even though they don't really have a part in it. That being said, I think it'll be interesting, what will the critics say? Because this is an entire book that addresses what they saw as a deficiency in The Color of Compromise. This is about the Christians who did the right thing, who stood up for justice. Now, what they got to deal with is, most of the time it was Black Christians, not white Christians.
Which gets down to, I think, a central point of of maybe some of the motivations, which I love about your writing, is your writing promotes a lot of, it provokes a lot of different things. And I think that critique of the color of compromise provokes what is an underlying issue, is, which is, do you want the truth, or do you want to be seen as good?
Mm,
So it's like these things that you have to confront within the white Christian complex and the white Christian identity, which is like, oh, we have to be the good guys, we have to be the heroes, we have to be the saviors. And what if the proper narrative, and what if the gospel way is for you not to be the savior, but for you to follow people who are trailblazing along the path of truth, justice, and righteousness? What if that's the way?
stepping
You
on
know?
toes, Doc.
Oh, I
Stepping
mean,
on
I
toes.
mean, that's what we do. It's pass the mic. So you talk a lot about this idea of these profiles, and
Hmm.
you highlight a number of different Christians, Black Christians, who have done this in the past, so we can glean and learn from. I've long said that my favorite figure from the civil rights era was Medgar Evers. And I've long
Yeah.
said that he represents for me someone who I have always looked up to and been fascinated by. I think his calm, his composure, his poise, also the tragic nature of how quickly he was taken out. You profile his widow, Merle Evers
Hmm.
Williams. And so I want you to talk a little bit about her, because she's at the beginning of this book. So why did you
Yeah.
choose her? And what was, in your mind, something that we could gain from her as someone who was kind of thrust into this, right? So it's not necessarily that, yes, she had these deep convictions, but her husband was kind of known as the one on the front lines, and then she's the one that you profile. Talk a little bit about
Hmm.
that.
So, as a writer, I do some of my most efficient and inspired writing if I know how to start. A lot of times I don't know how to start and I'll delay and fumble, or I'll start in the middle and try to come
You
back
letting
because,
them in on the secrets, Doc. You letting them in on the
that's
writing secrets, Doc.
this is past the mic. I got to. So,
Ah,
but with this one, I knew exactly how I wanted to start. And it's this incredible God moment. Back in 2017, Bo York, our producer, and I, we were at the grand opening of the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. And it was shrouded and clouded by controversy. Number one, how are you going to do a civil rights museum in Mississippi? Are y'all going to tell the real history? You can tell the truth, or you going to whitewash it, as Mississippians, some parts of Mississippians have been known to do. The second issue with the grand opening was the governor at the time, Phil Bryant, who was a Republican, invited Donald Trump, who was president at the time. And of course, Trump stands for everything against civil rights, right? Does not vibe with the spirit at all. So Representative John Lewis was supposed to come. He pulled out. One of the local Black Congress people, he pulled out. Merle Evers stayed in it, and she spoke. And what is chilling, in the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, they have the exact gun that was used to kill her husband, Medgar Evers.
my mama,
Can you imagine
my mama.
being walking through a museum and seeing the weapon that killed your spouse? So already, she's a queen. She's incredibly, just the strength and this aura about her, right? So she does her public address. Then afterwards, there's a press conference, small, 20, 30 people. We got press passes through the witness. And so I was there to witness and literally record. I have this video on my cell phone to this day, that press conference. And one of the questions from a journalist was, how do you compare right now, the 21st century, and what we're going through and experiencing, to the civil rights movement? And I'll never forget what she said. She said, I see things now that I hoped I would never see again. She talked about negativism. She talked about resistance to progress, all of those things coming from the highest offices. And you knew who she was talking about. But then she sounded a note of hope. And she said, there's something about the spirit of justice that raises
My
up
mama.
within you and gets you ready, determined all over again, and just goosebumps, right?
My
And I
mama.
was like, That's what we need to focus on.
Wow.
That's what we need to grasp right now. It's not what is the strategy or the tactics. It's not the opposition arrayed against us. What is truly remarkable in the Black freedom struggle is not the oppression that we experienced, but the resistance to that oppression that showed up in every age, in every era, no matter whether it was slavery or segregation or the racial wealth gap or whatever it is. We've always shown up to demand our dignity and to declare our humanity. And that is what I call the spirit of justice. And brother, I'll tell you, just in my spirit, I'm not a prophet, but maybe being prophetic, like you said, as we enter in further into 2024, this election season and whatever comes next, because it doesn't end in November, whatever comes next, we are going to need to gear up, get our minds and our hearts and our spirits right for an ongoing struggle for dignity. And what we need in that situation is not just more information on social media, not more pious words and trivialities. What we are going to need is the spirit of justice to tap into so that we can resist and persist and demonstrate resilience and resistance in this coming era.
And this gets down to why you have written this book, that spirit that comes from the inside. One of the most common figures that we see whenever someone wants to talk about the spirit of justice is, of course, Dr. King. And
Mm-hmm.
you talk about Dr. King, but maybe in a different way than what people are expecting. And you distill something I think is very important for how we understand King and how we interpret King. I want to hear you talk about that for a little bit, because I think that's going to bless the people, but also maybe afflict the people a little bit, afflict the
Yeah.
comfortable, should we say.
I profiled dozens of people in this book, mostly Black Christians, some white folks, and probably 70 to 80% of them are going to be brand new for most readers. People like Anna Arnold Hedgeman, even Anna Murray Douglas, who's on the cover of the book, and almost nobody recognizes her. Elias Camp Morris, I can go on and on and on. And so I had a little bit of attention in doing an entire chapter on Martin Luther King Jr., but I felt it was necessary. So why do an entire chapter on King when we've already got so many books about him and he's the representative of the civil rights movement, right? So if you're trying to kind of uncover hidden figures, why go to the most well-known person? Because that which is most familiar is often most misunderstood. That which is most familiar is often most misunderstood. That
That's
means
good.
there's a mythology that has arisen around this man. And so, how do we cut through the myth and get to the actual person? And so, that was the purpose of this chapter. The chapter is called Beyond the Quotable King. And we get past the I have a dream speech and we talk about not just that one line about, well, actually, we get into the I have a dream speech, I should say, and not just that one line. We talk about the beginning of the speech where he talks about America had a promissory note and she's failed, it's bounced, and we've come to cash that check. We talked about the fact that it's called the March on Washington for Jobs and
For
Freedom.
jobs and freedom.
And here's where we start in that chapter on Martin Luther King Jr. We often think of him as King the activist. Only as an afterthought do we think of him as King the preacher and
Yeah.
theologian.
Yeah.
So he says in one of his books, I'm fundamentally a preacher and a churchman. And that's how he envisioned his life. He would be a local church pastor who was involved in justice issues locally, but that he would devote his time to study, perhaps teaching, but also preaching in the life of the church. And I think if we miss that part at the beginning, we can't truly understand his life of activism all the way to the end.
And I think this is important, particularly because there's a way in which those of us as Black Christians who are having the spirit of justice rise up within us, we're often reduced down to our stances on justice. We're often reduced down to our stances on public policy. We're reduced down to our participation in marches or sit-ins or anything that would lead towards the awareness of justice and truth and reconciliation for others. But I think that is such a countercultural decision to say, I'm going to actually put King as the preacher and theologian at the beginning of this, because I think that's crucial for understanding everything that comes after, everything
Exactly.
that happens after. As we got to do a part two of this, because this is just we don't have enough time to cover. We have Thea Bowman. There's so many others I want to touch on. So we got to do a part two of this, regardless of what Bo says. But I want to talk a little bit about what you think this can do for us today, what you think this can do for us now, because as believers in Jesus, we believe we go beyond, dare I say, the quotable Jesus, dare I say, beyond the comfortable Jesus. And you are calling us towards something. And I think that this podcast and what we do at the Witness, it calls people beyond what is most comfortable, beyond what they think is the safe path. It calls us to an uncomfortable path that follows the spirit of justice, follows the spirit of God on the inside of us, which tells us that there's truth here. Go where truth is, not where comfort is. So what do you think
100%.
we need to learn through the spirit of justice and through your work, through your tireless scholarship that can inform us today at the end of 2024 and beyond?
Throughout the book, the spirit of justice is lowercase, and let's just specifically referring to the title of the book, except for one section in the introduction where spirit is capitalized because it means the Holy Spirit. And so, looking through the lens of faith, we can understand the spirit of justice as the Holy Spirit speaking to us and within us. The Holy Spirit is a spirit of affirmation, that in a society that constantly denigrates us, tells us that we're not beautiful, tells us that we're lesser, the spirit of justice says, no, you have the fingerprint of the Creator upon you. You are created with dignity and worth as much as anybody else in this world, and you ought to be treated that way. The spirit of justice is also the spirit of defiance, the spirit that stands up and declares our dignity before anybody offers it to us. We don't need permission to be fully image bearers of God. We already are. And so I think the spirit of justice, I often in my talks remind people at the end, we should not be timid about justice. We should not be timid about our own dignity and identity. We seem to walk into these meetings or these conversations tiptoeing and wringing our hands like, I hope they accept our message. I hope they agree with me. Who cares? We are on God's side. God's not on our side. We're on God's side when it comes to asserting the full equality of human beings, particularly people of African descent, right? So say it with your chest, as the culture says. And I think the spirit of justice is that spirit of defiance that allows us to walk into the room and shift the atmosphere. Oh, I love reading about some of these folks because you can just sense that if you were in their physical presence, you would feel a sort of power emanating from them almost because they have such assurance, they have such confidence. And what I want to say is that is coming from a source that's not just from their positivity or their mindset, that's coming from a spirit within them that imbues us and indwells us the moment we say yes to Jesus. And we have access to that spirit right now today.
My, my, my. My. The spirit of justice, the stories of faith, race, and resistance. It will be everywhere September 3rd. Am I right? September 3rd. It will
September
be
3rd.
everywhere. And if you are listening to this or watching this, I don't know what other encouragement, inspiration you would need than to get this book, put it on loop. If you're an audio listener, whatever it takes.
I read the book. Yes.
He reads the book. Come on, y'all.
And
Let's
I'll say
support our
this
brother.
just by way of practicality. Number one, if you listen to this before September 3rd, pre-order the book. It really helps boost it in terms of profile and notoriety. Number two, you can read the first chapter already. You can download that for free, and that frames the entire book. Just go to my links in bio. Number three, if you've already got the book or you already plan on getting it, share this with someone. Share this episode with someone. Encourage someone else. I don't have the kind of platform that allows me to just announce a book and it just sells like gangbusters. I need you to spread the word. And I would love it if you did a book study on this, a Bible study group on this, share it with your church. I really do think it'll help and strengthen the church for what is already here and what is about to come. So those are some ways that you can help pre-order the book, and you can download the chapter for free, share it with someone, and form a group around it.
And also shop local, y'all. Get this book, get this book in local spaces too, man. Come on, y'all. Let's get behind our brother, make him a 3-time best-selling author. Dr. Jamar Tisby, congratulations in advance. A phenomenal work, excellent scholarship as always, and inspiration. I'll be chewing. We got to clip that last part. I'll be chewing on that last part for a long time, brother. That is what we need in 2024. We appreciate you, man. Congratulations in advance.
Appreciate you. Thanks.